Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast celebrating the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. And in this season 2, we are looking at the film Blazing Saddles. And today, we are looking at getting a little track laid 1 minute at a time. I'm Alan Sanders. I'm your host.
And I am Walt Murray, your co-host.
And coming back on a Monday, we are so pleased to have Jim O'Kane as our guest. Jim, welcome back.
I'm having a great time. Thanks again, fellas, for having me back this next week. It's really been exciting.
Well, I figured when we're talking about something getting laid, we had to have you back.
What have you heard? I don't know.
Well, apparently you're really good at track.
Yeah, I one of my many obsessive interests actually started about the same time this movie was being made. When I was a kid, I used to make lots of model railroads, and I have built and destroyed many railroads due to my many moves. But I do have a love of rails, and this particular minute has quite a bit of trackage and things, and a lot of hidden bits about the rails. This is the first time as we were getting back into it with Slim Pickens on his horse, swinging and a whooping and a hollering. This is the first time we actually get a name for Mr. Pickens' character. It's Mr. Taggert, and anybody who's ever read the writings of Ayn Rand, who's read Atlas Shrugged, the name of the Transcontinental Railroad there was Taggert Transcontinental. So it's kind of a play on this guy is building a transcontinental railroad, and hardly the Atlas Shrugged character from the book, but it's interesting seeing that they named him Taggert.
Well, let's go ahead and set the stage here, because when we last left, we heard the famous line, "What in the wide, wide world of sports is it going on here?" So we continue this minute on Monday, this episode number 6. With I hired you people to get a little track laid. We're going to end with, oh, the Camptown Lady, sing this song. So we come back full circle to that song. And we're chatting about this. And I have to know, did I miss something in the 70s? Was Kansas City a haven for homosexuality?
Actually, I did some research on this. And
there's a Wikipedia for everything, isn't
there
it?
is. And
Jim, we'd rather you sit this one out because you still have credibility. Walt, go for it.
Well, from what I could find, there are no references to Kansas City being a haven for homosexuality. And there's actually some discussion out there that I read on why they used this, and nobody can really seem to come up with anything other than just it sounded better than using Chicago or anything else. So there's really not a definitive answer to this.
Because that always bothered me as a kid. I didn't get it. It was a funny line just because it's just a funny line. But I was like,
that's kind of what everybody says. It just sounded funny. Because
they spend so much time, and like Jim just got done saying about the name Taggert, and I'm so impressed usually looking at comedies and these kind of movies of the 70s that have so much like understanding of literature and history and song and just culture, and they wedge these little lines in here or there or people's names that it's almost like we're watching a pre-version of Deadpool where there's so many in-jokes we can't catch them all the first time.
I'm just wondering if it's that Borscht Belt idea that any town with a K is funny. Cucamonga, Kansas City, Kokomo. Those are all, it's a K town, so you try to drop a K name in wherever you can.
Yeah, and it does flow pretty well. So it's not an awkward phrase.
It wasn't then.
Yeah. It's an awkward phrase now. But no, it kind of rolled pretty smoothly.
Well, I had to do this, Walt, because our good friends over at the Rocketeer Minute, who for some reason we seem to reference more often than anybody else, I had to go to the Urban Dictionary.
Yes, I've Go ahead. I'm going to let you run with that one.
I'm doing this very, very graciously, but according to the Urban Dictionary, Kansas City faggots, a term that is used when multiple heterosexual men start behaving in a very homosexual way, with no prior intent or warning of said act. According to the definition, a Kansas City faggot usually occurs when someone starts singing Oklahoma, to Camptown Races, or Cotton Eye Joe, and no member of the opposite sex is around to dance with.
However, somebody had said that the origination of that is Blazing Saddles. And so it wasn't that they were pulling from something in culture. Culture adopted the term from Blazing Saddles.
It very well could be.
And oddly, if you go and look at the etymology of the word, this word has been used as an abusive term for old women and homosexuals since the 16th century.
Well, the last word, the disparaging word, not Kansas City.
No, not Kansas City. The
Kansas City.
F-word,
That's a way
if
of been
you will.
slurring people for 400 years.
Yeah, and I am trying to be respectful and not use these words if I can avoid it. But
hey, I've gone all in.
yeah, I've noticed. So but you know it.
Well, but check this out, because this whole idea is going to come around again once we get to the French mistake. The idea of normally heterosexual men being caught up or thought of as suddenly homosexual because of their actions.
Yeah, and I think that this is a good place for us to kind of highlight how much culture has changed, probably for the better, in that we're really working hard as a society to not use disparaging words towards people.
Yeah, I don't want anybody labeling me because I like to dance with dudes.
Right.
They look like they were having fun, if you think about it.
I mean, Walt, you and I, we like to do the tango.
Well, and I think that people definitely look at me and have the and accurately saying that white guys can't dance when they look at me.
Oh, it is so true.
I
can't dance, can't jump, can't shoot.
No, I can't. So, but this is this is one of those words that I don't really remember at that time, 73, 74, how that word was used very often. I was pretty young at that time, kindergarten maybe. So, and I don't know how disparaging this would have been, but I assume it was pretty bad.
Well, it's interesting. The evolution of the term, I used to read the Shadow comic book, which was set in the 40s, and they would often talk about lighting a fag as they were waiting, and that was a cigarette, and that was the slang for a cigarette.
Right.
So it always threw me as a kid.
Yeah, in the UK particularly.
We lost Jim.
Jim's kind of looking at this discussion.
Oh no, I'm here. Can you hear me? I mean, I'm just listening in. It's my search history right now is rather embarrassing. I have to tell you.
Well, Jim's kind of looking at us like we would watch the wide world of sports from a distance.
What, the wide world of sports? Yeah. It's intriguing. I mean, this is from where we're at, and we talked about this on a previous episode. The taboos. The level of taboos never change in a society. It change what is taboo, and nowadays it's difficult for us to talk about these things. It's what's known as maledicta, bad words, or words that are no longer in favor, or words that are objectionable or offensive or hurtful, and trying to talk about this in a reasoned manner without offending is a difficulty in the 21st century. But it's something that we have to look at, and remembering at the time, it still was a problem. I mean, Slim Pickens had a problem with all these words, and you can see why somebody like John Wayne, who was originally cast in this movie, he didn't want to be a part of it because it would forever taint the way he looked.
Well, I don't think he was cast. I think he was approached.
Yeah, or requested to be cast.
Well, the famous story is he said, "Look, this is too blue for me. I can't do it, but I'll be the first in line to buy a ticket."
Yeah. And being able to it's difficult to say. You say this could be career ending if you don't if you're not playing it right. Slim Pickens had he had already had an established career, and having this on him where there was a possibility of people getting upset with him, it was a risk. And it was, it's interesting seeing him being able to be in this movie and play it as straight as he could, and which made it very funny. I mean, all these old a Western actor type like that playing it straight, it makes it that much funnier. But these are, it's offensive now. It was offensive back then calling people names like that. So and it was a little bit more culturally acceptable. But in
the 70s.
Yeah, in the 70s. Now, now we're, I don't know, more enlightened or whatever, but
no, I don't know. Actually, I don't know anybody who uses that term, that pejorative term today. Yeah. It really, there's other terms in this movie that are still used today, but that one, I'll be honest, I can't remember the last time I heard anybody use that phrase.
No, I can't either. I mean, it's been years.
It's for some reason, it's one of those words that just suddenly just stopped being used.
Yeah. Well, and I think that knowing how my friends who are gay feel about that word makes that word really uncomfortable for me to even say. The same with the N-word, because I know how my black friends feel about it. So it's tough for me. I'm still working through how to use it. How to even,
discuss this. Yeah.
Have the discussion.
Yeah. But again, everything's context. Being in theater, being involved with film, trust me, I have an entire eclectic mix of friends and people of all different persuasions and interests and everything. And I always go back to this idea whenever I used to hire people is you have to know your audience before you can let certain jokes go. And I've heard, people say things about other people of the same persuasion, but it's okay because we're in the same company. We're all it's joking. We're laughing. We're not making a political statement. We're not going out there trying to be mean or hurtful. We're joking around. I mean, the black cowboy actor we've got coming on in a few episodes, Dwayne Towns. I mean, he and I were talking on the phone today. He was reciting just about verbatim all the lines, including the N-word. And he's saying, hey, it makes sense in 1974 because they were trying to show you how stupid the people were that were using that word. So, yeah, you say you just have to know the context. I mean, and I think that's the biggest thing that we want to continue to reinforce with this is if you miss the story because the word
I agree.
supersedes what's happening underneath, then you're missing a real big, important movie. As silly as it looks on the surface, all the comedy, all the ridiculousness, there is a real heavy message coming through underneath, and you're going to miss it if you're worried about a word.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let you handle this next part where Bart explains that his grandmother was Dutch. Go right ahead.
Oh, I am going to handle this with. Oh, again, this is a safe for work public podcast. I can't even talk.
Take a deep breath.
This is a safe for work podcast. Yeah, let's go very quickly. Obviously, Taggert's in charge here because poor Lyle gets just clubbed over the head with the riding crop.
Listen, dummy. The surveyors say they may run into some quicksand up ahead. Better check it out.
Okay, I'll send down a team of horses to check out the ground.
Horses?
Yeah, which sounds like it has an iron bar right in the middle of the whole thing. It's just a big cartoon wump.
I do think they used a lot of cartoon sound effects in this movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And is this where he calls him dummy?
Yeah.
When he hits him on the head?
Well, he does talk about quicksand, and he's like, well, we'll send a couple of horses up there to take a look and see if there's any quicksand. And he's like, horses? We can't afford to lose any horses.
Yeah.
So he's like, send a couple of the black guys.
Yes.
He does use the N-word, and I will tell you, Jim, I don't know how you thought when you first saw this, but the very first time and every single time, including now, watching it on my computer as it's looping, when Cleavon Little comes forward with his hat on his heart as if he's like revealing some deep, dark family secret. And he's like,
Sir, he specifically requested 2 nicknames. Well, to tell a family secret, my grandmother was Dutch.
Get on that handcar and take it down at the end of that line.
Just trying to help you out.
Get!
well, you know how we requested a couple of, well, to tell the family secret, my grandmother was Dutch. I mean, it's so damn funny.
That is so great. Well, and it shows you who is really in control, or who's, you see the fight for control. And you really do see in Bart, he is the smart one here.
Yeah.
You know, he is much smarter than Lyle. Now, Lyle has the upper hand, but Bart is really smarter than him.
Right now, it's like Bart 3, Lyle 0.
Yeah.
Every single exchange in these last 3 minutes that we've had with Jim, every single exchange, Bart has won.
Well, and you see that at this point, the only reason that Lyle has won over Bart is simply because of the power structure within the company.
Yeah, it's very he's very much, and again, it's the whole, I was saying this from American folk humor. This comes all the way back to Uncle Remus days, that he is he's the Brer Rabbit. He's the guy that knows that you just push things out and use the system to control the people that are over you, that are trying to control you. It wasn't going to work, but everything from the days of Brer Rabbit to Bugs Bunny, and this is a Warner Brothers movie after all. Cleavon Little is taking the Bugs Bunny role here versus the Elmer Fudd that is Lyle.
It also shows me that, I may lose this one, but I'm not taking the loss lying down. I'm going to get my shot in.
Well, it's not just a shot. He wins. I mean, yeah, he has no choice. He's got to do what he's being told. But you look at the look on Lyle's face when he says that line. I mean, Charlie can't stop from laughing. He puts his hand up to his face and like turns away from the camera. Lyle is just like, shit. He's so angry that this guy would come forward and say, hey, here's my family secret. My grandmother was Dutch.
and Lyle is somewhere between, he knows he just had, and just get out of my face. I don't have time for this nonsense.
I mean, sometimes that's the way you win. You take your small victories. I did this original play several years ago. It was at Theater in the Square, and it was an original, and it was this whole idea of these expatriates as trying to escape the war, and I was cast as sort of like a slim boy toy for this older matriarch. And there was this bigger, brooding guy who just was angry that I was her favorite. And there's this scene that she wrote where we're supposed to be bringing the flag down to show that we didn't have any allegiance to one side or the other because we didn't want the Nazis to attack us. It was set in World War II. And this guy, literally the direction, I was constantly giving him verbal jabs while he was constantly giving me physical assault. So at one point he picks me up and like throws me on the ground. And we had an open audience at the end, and we had sort of a Q&A, and everyone said it was amazing how the smaller, quote, frail character constantly had the upper hand on the bigger, stronger guy. Even though he got the physical abuse, you could tell the mental jabs that my character was giving back just constantly enraged him, and you realized, well, yeah, the guy's bigger and stronger, and he won the physical fight, but he lost the overall war. And I see that here, where Bart, he's got the verbal sparring here. He can just constantly, and he's an irritant now, and Lyle loses his cool. He's like, get! He's just sick of it because he can't deal with this.
Yeah, and he knows they're sticking it to him every chance they get.
Yeah. And I love it. I love the fact because he never loses his cool. Sheriff, I mean, even later, which Jim won't be here with us for it, but even when he decides to take a physical action, he's always doing it in a very smooth, cool way.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and he, I won't be here for a future minute, but when he just He just tells himself, "Oh, baby," he admires his own prowess at these
Oh,
things.
baby, I got to do it.
Yeah.
Well, did y'all read the backstory of Charles McGregor, who plays Charlie here?
No.
Okay, so he is a really interesting guy, and I kind of stumbled across his bio by accident. He is an actor, but later in life, he played Superfly he played Fat Freddy in Superfly. He was in some of the,
I forgot about
blaxploitation movies. Yeah, so before he was an actor, he was in prison. And he wasn't just in prison, he was in prison. And he wrote an autobiography called Up from the Walking Dead, the Charles McGregor story. And it has all kinds of great ratings on Amazon and some other places. So I've got to get my hands on this book. But he apparently grew up in the streets of New York and was a pretty rough guy, and ended up going to prison. And I'm trying to remember what it was he went in for, but I know it was violent crime, and he was a mess. So his book, Up from the Walking Dead, tells his story of going to prison and realizing this is not the life I want. And through acting and through other things in his life, turned his life around, and got these great roles as an actor, and really became a very upstanding man, and went around to prisons and schools and talked about the bad things that come from living a bad life, and how everybody needs to follow a better path, and using his acting career as the backdrop for that.
Wow.
And
that's pretty cool.
And he comes across a very likable character in this film, and it's just beautiful.
He does. Every scene we have, we know why Charlie is friends with Bart. Bart and Charlie, you realize, are probably the two guys in charge of everything.
Yeah, definitely. And they have a history. Obviously, they seem to know each other longer than just two guys that wound up next to each other on a Gandhi dancer line.
Yeah.
Because they're walking away, and Charlie in the movie is congratulating him on how funny that was about your grandmother was Dutch.
I knew your grandma was Dutch.
But there are some lines that were left out here according to the original script. According to the script that they went to go shoot with, Bart, after he says the whole "my grandmother was Dutch," he apparently had more lines that were either cut or they decided not to film them. Said, "Are you familiar with Holland? Well, you know where Antwerp cuts off Rotterdam, right? Well, right there we ran this little after-hours windmill." And then Lyle explodes, "Get on that handcar and take it down to the end of the line." So we lose half of the lines that were written for Bart. They just end it with "my grandmother was Dutch." So as they're walking away, Charlie says, "I had no idea your grandmother was Dutch." And Bart says, "Well, grandfather said she always liked hanging around with a lot of dykes."
Wow.
Man. Well, I'm kind of glad they cut all that. I think that would have been a lot of extraneous jibber jabber they didn't really need.
Yeah,
I think I think Walt, as we go through this, we're going to find us saying the same thing we said about all the cuts from Young Frankenstein in the script. I've gone through this. There are so many lines that the scene wouldn't have been as crisp. Or you know how you say that this movie just constantly just keeps barreling forward? It's like there's one joke after another. It's like nonstop.
Yeah.
If they had shot the movie that was written, it would have been, dear Lord, when's the next joke coming? It's been too long.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been Clerks. It would have been a lot of stories back to back to back. I mean, funny, but the pacing would have been off.
Right.
This is a lightning. They're on to the next scene right now. They literally roll out of the scene with the final callback going back to knowing the lyrics to Camptown Ladies that they acted like they didn't know. So that was a nice little final callback.
Right.
Which is,
and I think this is one of those cases where they already made one joke about sexual preference. Did you really need another one within 10 seconds?
Yeah, and thankfully from where we sit, another pretty highly offensive term in our culture today, So I'm kind of glad they didn't use it.
Well, it's that playing with the double entendre because it's an actual term for, those mini dams that are all throughout Holland or the Netherlands. But with the audience of even 1974, they would have gone, we already had the big joke.
Yeah.
This is sort of like, it's almost like the big joke was already there. You don't need another one because this one kind of falls short.
Yeah.
Yes. And you're right. We did see that in Young Frankenstein several times where it was almost recycling it within 30 seconds.
Right. Sometimes when you score the big hit, you don't need 2 or 3, aftershocks.
No, and it does give the audience time to laugh as they walk over to the handcart.
Yeah, and you get the milder joke with the Camptown Lady's reprise here, and getting on the handcart and dragging you into the next scene, and so they're out of this one already. So it's
yeah, and I prefer the way they either they cut it in the editing room or they chose not to shoot it, because I haven't seen any outtakes that show the lines that I just quoted here. So I think the pacing is so much better in the film cut than what's in the script. And I think you're absolutely right, Jim. This sudden singing of the song and they realize, oh my God, they do know this song, is a nice little nod at just, once again, how clever and smart and 2 steps ahead Bart is over Lyle.
Yeah, it's a nice 1-2 punch.
It also kind of reminds me of if you've ever been to the Carousel of Progress at Disneyland. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow. Every scene in the Carousel of Progress, when you get out of one scene into the next, there's a song that leads you into the next scene, and this is kind of the song that ties you over into the upcoming quicksand scene. So it's cinematically it works quite well. Although
it's a perfect bridge to continue this next whatever moment, this next challenge, this next plot point, because they're leaving this group of people to get the next challenge. In this case, instead of dealing with the human element, they're going to be dealing with the nature.
Yeah,
the 3 things you can challenge in a typical, who's the bad guy? Is it yourself? Is it nature, or is it your fellow man? And in this case, they get to go battle quicksand next.
Although, in terms of lack of reality, and this just kind of, I'm annoyed by it more than I should be. The pump car, the hand car that they're using, I've worked one of those. And actually, if you'd like to, there's a great place in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, the Shelburne Falls Trolley Museum. It's in central Massachusetts. They have an actual hand car. It's also known as a pump car. You can use one yourself with a rider. And if anyone's ever operated one of these things, it works just like they're showing, that back and forth lever going back that helps pump the wheels. You are actually starting in 4th gear. There is no lower gear. It's just one big gear, and it's set at about 4th gear on a truck. So when you are pushing, you need a lot of leverage pushing up and down. Two people are barely capable of moving that hand car at especially that speed. I'm wondering. I keep looking at that piece and trying to see if there's like a hidden rope somewhere of some prop folks pulling the hand car along for them, because
that would explain why a few minutes ago when Lyle first shows up, there's 4 guys pumping the hand car.
Yeah,
there's 2 on each side.
It's extremely hard to push. I mean, it's if you had a couple of minutes with it, it is quite a pickle jar to open up. I can just in looking at it, I can feel it in my arms. The last time I tried to do that about 5 or 6 years ago. But it's that is not a realistic method of getting one of those hand cars going.
Well, depending on how big your screen is right now, if you're looping it right around second 54, just as the camera is on the tracks and it pulls up just in time to see him step on top of the car, it looks like there's a rope that's coming from the front of the hand
you're
car.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because that is barely. I mean, the way they kind of take off with a lurch, that's definitely a rope and not their own doing. It's really hard to push that. I mean, if
this is why we have the best guests in the world on our show. First of all, everybody's better than anything you and I are bringing, Walt. But
boy,
I would have never in a bajillion years thought that only 2 people would have had a hard time starting a hand car like that. And now all of a sudden, I see the rope. I'll never unsee that rope.
I think it's a cable, in fact. So
Yeah, I would think a rope would break. It's very heavy. I mean, it's an iron. Well, I mean, it's wood, but the gear mechanism is a really high powered. I guess it was steel. The one that I used was steel, but this could be either like a high temperature iron or steel. And the gears are kind of a mesh at a right angle. When you're pumping, it's kind of a cam that moves gears below it, similar to the universal joint the differential joint on the back of a car. The mesh kind of goes over like a meat grinder kind of a thing. It's very hard to push, and it is only one gear. And the other, I mean, when they switch scenes here, when they're going up a hill, I can't imagine the two of them gently, singing a song and pumping it up a hill, because it's quite a workout.
Well, let me ask you this, Jim, because you're more of the mechanical and expert on this, especially having pumped one. When I was a kid, I couldn't figure out, how do you know which direction the handcar is going to go?
It is going in the way that you started out as. I mean, it's going to go in either direction. So it could just as easily have started going the other way, and you really kind of.
So how do you make sure that when they both get on board this thing, how do they know that they're going to make it go away from the group instead of plowing into the group?
Kind of like the way you do skiing. You'd have somebody push you on the back of it. You start it in one direction and then just continue doing that seesaw motion, and it'll keep going in that particular direction. But if you stop, it will start going backwards downhill, and that pumping action will do it on its own if you have any kind of a grade over maybe 1%. So it's obviously more and more looking like a cable or a rope.
That's amazing. Because that used to always bug me as a kid, is how do you know if one side of the handle is up higher than the other? Is that the side that it's going to go if you punch down? Or like, how did you know which direction once you start, pumping the seesaw little handle?
Yeah, it's just the way, it's like stirring the pot. Whichever way you start it off at, if you start it by pushing it toward the west, it's going to head west. If you push it toward the east, it's going to head east. And you're just going to be adding energy to that with the seesaw.
Now, imagine if you say once you're in fourth, if you imagine it's a fourth gear out of 5.
Yeah.
Once you get going, I imagine you can be cruising pretty easily.
Oh yeah, you can get that thing up to about like 20, 30 miles an hour if you're really pumping it. It's like a bicycle. But again, it's gonna and once you're at speed, if you're at speed on a level track. There's not a lot of friction to the rail, so you don't have to add as much power to it if you're at speed. It's just that initial getting over the inertia is pretty dramatic.
This is kind of funny because just recently my daughter was test driving a car. She had blown the engine in her previous car, and we were looking at some cars for her, and it was a stick shift. It was a manual, and hardly anybody knows what a manual stick shift is to this day. And I had to explain to her, the importance of first gear being your starter gear, but once you get rolling, you want to be in a higher gear. And she took to it pretty quickly, but it's amazing how you and I right now and Walt all talking about being a fourth gear. Nobody knows what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah, it goes away. I for a long time, I got tired of fixing automatic transmissions, so I'd only buy manual transmission cars. And both my kids learned on manual cars, and my daughters told me that she grew up. She said this really was awful because whenever she met some guy who couldn't drive her car, she felt less of them because it's like, you don't know how to drive a stick. What's wrong with you? So,
oh, I will tell you this: my daughter loved learning to drive a stick. We borrowed this car for about 3 days, and I taught her how to drive the stick, and she immediately said, "I feel comfortable for the rest of my life now. I get the concept of the clutch, the stick, the shifting." I'll tell you, Jim, I had a stick shift for about 10 years in Atlanta traffic and eventually moved to an automatic. I drove that car and I immediately was back in manual mode, and I started longing for a stick shift.
Yeah, it's something that once you learn it, you find out that's the best way to do things. I mean, the only thing that's gotten me away from a stick is that I got an electric car which doesn't have any gears, so it doesn't need anymore.
Oh yeah, I drove an electric car for a couple of years. And
Yeah, what did you have, the Leaf?
Yeah, I had the Leaf.
Oh, they're great cars. Yeah, beautiful. And I could turn this into the Tesla hour like that, but I'm not going to do that because it's like, well, but when you get into an electric car, one of the worst feelings in the world is getting back into a gasoline powered car, and you feel like, oh, I'm in the past again. It's
I'm in the past.
It's difficult, but well, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's like when you're in a Leaf,
yeah.
it's like,
Yeah, well, you're driving like not just the Cadillac, you're driving like the Ferrari of electric cars. You've got a Tesla.
yeah, it just changes. It changes the way you look at the whole world. It's like, why have I ever stopped at a gas station? Why have I ever gotten an oil changed? Why have I ever just, it's like all the stuff you don't have to do anymore. And, we've lived for 100 years with gasoline powered cars, and that's the way life is. But then when you stop doing it, it's like, it's like we're recording now, and you say to yourself, why did I ever use a cassette tape when I could, I could record forever on a chip that's, they make them now that they're a terabyte for one of those microchips. And you think, how did I ever deal with rewinding and worrying about the tape stretching and all the fidelity issues? It's that way with electric cars nowadays. And when you see something like a hand pumped handcar, it's like, wow, that's just so Fred Flintstone-y of a way to get around.
Right, you're expected to see feet below trying to like push you along.
Yeah, it's a little more than that. I mean, if I can strongly recommend if you ever get to a railway museum where they have a handcar, try it out and just get an idea of the muscle required to move that big slab up and down a rail.
Well, this is where we're going to kind of end things because they're heading off to explore whatever's up the way. It's going to be a question I have for you, Walt, tomorrow. How do you lay track across quicksand and then suddenly decide, oh, there might be a quicksand here? But in the meantime, with this minute number 6, Jim, you're our guest. Did you have anything that we missed in this minute that we need to still discuss?
No, I'm really glad to be part of the railroad part of this. I love railroads. It always fascinates me how, I mean, this is the railroad and the history of America is such, they're so intertwined, and there's so many people that know so little about it. If you can tonight, go find, if you go to buy a library, if you're just looking around online, read up on the history of railroads. It's an amazing story. It's all part of American history, and just little things like how the rails are put in. The idea of these fellas that are called Gandhi dancers and how they built rails. I mean, it's just something to ponder. This is the Transcontinental Railroad, 3,000 miles. Coast to coast, and the rails can't be more than a 1/4 inch off of their 4 feet 8.5 inch distance. That's the standard railroad gauge. They had to maintain a 1/4 inch variance, no greater, with those tools that they're using, the Gandhi sticks that they hold, those big 5-foot sticks to align heavy iron rails on these little wooden ties, and keeping them 4 feet 8.5 inches apart for 3,000 miles in 1869, or in this case 1874. It's quite an engineering achievement, and it was done by hand. So just something to think about when you're watching this movie. Well, besides the laughs, there's a lot of history to look at and think about.
It's amazing. And the railroad, we talked. You just mentioned about the terabyte, about the data, about electric cars. The railroad was the technology that changed the West.
Yeah, that was the moon landing of 1860s. I mean, it's just, you think about, these guys used to have to ride horses up and down and could only go as far as a horse could go, maybe 10, 15 miles an hour. And all of a sudden they were going 40, 50 miles an hour on a smooth roadway of steel, all the way, from one side of the continent to the other. It's just amazing for that.
Well, it changed the role of the cowboy because cattle drives were no longer necessary. You could load them on boxcars and move them 200 miles instantly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the Chisholm Trail, walking cattle from Fort Worth to Chicago became something where you just brought them to Fort Worth and said goodbye to that job that you once had of pushing cattle north.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating, and and there's nothing boring about railroads to me. I just I enjoy the history of it.
And I know we can't avoid technology, and I can't wait for more and more of the Teslas out there to be out there. The private sector really pushing forward and doing the things that these guys are doing. But rail is still one of the most efficient ways of moving mass tons of product from one side of this country to the other. It's amazing that the train is still a fundamental part of our economy.
Yeah, and an initial, it's a pioneer in what we know as hybrids. So every time you see a locomotive, that locomotive is it's a diesel generator that's converting the diesel power into electricity and then running electric traction motors on those wheels. That's electromotive power that's been with us since 1939. I mean, those are just really big Priuses if you think about it. So it's it's an amazing technology that's been with us all the time, and like you said, it's the most efficient way of moving massive shipments across the country.
Walt, you and I, we bemoan the fact that when we're in our the radio studio, when we have guests that don't have the ability to remote in or Skype in, and we meet live, every now and then CSX ruins a take, but they are the backbone of our economy.
Well, and my family also has been shaped by the railroad in some ways. My grandfather, when he was a kid, got in an argument with my great-grandfather. He jumped on a train in Waycross, Georgia, and rode out to California and spent a couple months out there just hanging around. So he was kind of one of those boxcar riders that made that ride. And then my great-grandfather on the other side of the family was a railroad detective for a number of years before he quit and started opening businesses. So I think, the way, my family was a part of that, but transportation has shaped this country throughout our history because it is such a vast, huge swath of land that this country's built on. So it's really an amazing history that has been shaped and forged by the railroad.
Jim, unfortunately, this is going to be the end of our journey on this Wilder ride. We are just so happy that you were able to join us here in our season 2. So we're going to give you the stage for a second. You don't get to be part of the minute-by-minute discussion, but here's your chance to say what the movie Blazing Saddles has either meant to you or what you hope the audience gets from it by the time we make it to the end credits.
I think this encapsulates everything that Mel Brooks was trying to achieve. I think he achieved it marvelously. He talked about racism, homophobia, all the different isms that were facing the world in 1970, and it started out as a simple thing that he was taking the modern language, the comedy of 1974, and putting it in 1874, which had been done before. I mean, it had been done in F Troop. It had been done, the kind of comedies that he had built with things like Get Smart, making fun of current society by going back into the past. And he'd do it again and again. He'd do it in Young Frankenstein. He'd do it he did it in the 12 Chairs. This whole idea of making fun of our current stuff by looking back in the past and using the archetypes of that. But understanding that Mel Brooks made this mainstream, this wasn't something that was, it had the freedom of an independent film, but it was a top line studio movie. This was coming out of Warner Brothers. They were spending millions of dollars on this. They had a pretty big names in the cast, and they spent a lot of money on the production, and it succeeded. It baffled some of the critics. I know that Roger Ebert liked it. Vincent Canby didn't like it. But it really connected with audiences. Audiences really felt a part of this movie. It wasn't offensive the way that they were fearing. Audiences, black and white, gay and straight, they loved the movie because people saw a little bit of themselves in what they faced in this film. And I think it just shows the genius that Mel Brooks and his writing crew have for making people laugh and enjoy themselves for their own foibles. And I hope, if you watch this movie and you've never seen the movie before, that you don't come away offended by it, but you understand that this movie was offending the offenders, that this movie raised people up from this petty name calling that was, that's part of this film.
I know we're not supposed to jump ahead, but all I remind people every single time if they go to this movie, I said, watch what happens at the very end with the town of Rock Ridge. They take everybody in because they realize these are all good people, and they got to battle the one bad guy, which ironically happens to be the white politician.
Yeah, and this is if you haven't seen it, by the way, this movie is assuming from 1970s that the audience was familiar with westerns, which a lot of people nowadays, they don't watch old westerns. So I would recommend, if you're watching this movie, to check out other movies like Stagecoach, which is probably one of the first big name, it's a John Wayne, John Ford movie. Watch the movie Stagecoach, especially watch the comedy Destry Rides Again, because this is pretty much close to a not shot for shot, but a lot of the elements in Destry Rides Again come out in this movie, including you'll understand the Madeline Kahn character a lot better if you understand Marlene Dietrich's character, Frenchie, in Destry Rides Again, and understanding that they're not winning through violence, they're winning by outwitting the bad guys, and that's where that comedy comes from. So this follows in a long tradition of previous westerns, especially the western comedy. So I'd say if you get a chance, watch Stagecoach, watch Destry Rides Again, and then watch Blazing Saddles again. You'll probably get more out of it.
Awesome. Jim, you've been a fantastic guest, as you often are in all of the other movies you join in as a guest, and of course the movies that you do yourself and host. Tell everybody one more time where people can learn a little bit more about you.
Sure, you can find out all about me, or most all that I'm admitting to. If you go to jimokane.com, JIMOKANE, don't put in an apostrophe, JIMOKANE.com, and you can look at all my other podcasts like the Airport Minute, where we go over the 1970 Universal, not the comedy. Don't confuse us with the 1980 comedy, but the actual Burt Lancaster, Dean Martin movie, probably the granddaddy of all disaster films, Airport. You can also find, beside the Airport Minute, you can find the Rocketeer Minute, where we talk with Billy Campbell and crew about the 1991 Walt Disney film. And currently I'm working on Apollo13 Minute with my good friend Chris Henry. And we're talking with actual astronauts and flight directors and all kinds of people who got us to the moon and back. So check that out again, jimokane.com. And we're also available for Apollo13 Minute on iTunes and Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast.
Excellent. Walt, where can people learn a little bit more about where to listen to our podcast?
I would recommend that you go out to facebook.com/The Wilder Ride and join our listeners group and get in the conversation there. Also, we would really appreciate it if you are enjoying what you're hearing, if you take a couple minutes and hop on over to iTunes and find us there, The Wilder Ride, and give us a rating. We would really appreciate a 5-star rating if you're enjoying what you're hearing, and then take a minute to comment and just let us know what you think about the podcast. And that helps other people find us as well as they search for Gene Wilder, Blazing Saddles, or our podcast.
I would say if you're a listener to this right now and you're going to go out and listen to some of these other podcasts, all these guests that we're having in this season, and you like what they're doing, do the same thing for their show as well. We're all in a tight-knit community. Everybody here likes to support each other. There's nobody trying to undercut the other. There's no Headley Lamars in this group. So do what you can to put a rating for everybody that you like and listen to.
And by the way, if jumping in, if you haven't heard a movie that you like yet, either make your own podcast, or you can go find out some established podcasts that may have done the movie that you love. Go to moviesbyminutes.com. We have a list of now over 110, I think it is, 110 different movies. So check that out at moviesbyminutes.com.
And hey, Jim, you're fine taking people into the listeners group that may not be interested in making a podcast. They just want to learn about these podcasts.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Join us out there at the, is it Movie Maker? Look for Movies by Minutes on Facebook, and you'll turn up the movie makers and movie listeners. I think I can't remember the name of the exact Facebook. Yeah.
Movies makers and listeners, the group.
Yeah, it's out there. We're on Facebook, so check us out, and we'll let you in. Don't worry.
And at moviesbyminutes.com, 117 different podcasts.
Holy smokes!
As of the recording today of that, that's constantly growing and changing. I remember some of the older podcasts when I first started getting into this would start trying to name all the movies, and they just said, you know what? There's too many to name. We just go check it out. Moviesbyminutes.com. It's plural. All right. Well, Come back tomorrow, Tuesday, because we're going to continue with the Camptown Lady sing this song, Doodar, Doodar, and we're going to end with, they in trouble. And we're going to find out, well, what does that mean, they in trouble? But you got to come back tomorrow for a Tuesday edition of this, The Wilder Ride.
Doodar, doodar.
Grandmother was Dutch.
Well, she liked being by the water.
I am really tired of this hand crank.
Where's the clutch?